We do have a line open for you at 977-1070. We also have a caller on the line. Let's say hello to Brian. Brian, welcome to the Schilling Show.
Thanks. Governor,
Yes.
a guy like me has limited amount of time I can invest in trying to bring about change, and my focus has been on with the 10th Amendment movement. What I would like to ask you is, why is it that states have allowed their rights to incrementally been usurped by the federal government? What is it? What are the downsides of governors and state legislators asserting their rights rather than just sitting back passively and taking whatever comes out of Washington? Why does this happen?
Brian, I agree with you, and I agree with the phenomenon. And if states were just given the ability to do their own thing, I think the true best practices would emerge, like in the area of education alone. Look, federal government gives the states 11 cents out of every dollar that they spend, but it comes with about 16 cents worth of strings attached. I think you could argue that really across the board. The issue ends up to be money. Federal government gives money to follow their pathway, and states buy into that. Really, and I think there's an opportunity right now to get best practices back to the states. When it comes to Arizona and this immigration bill that they passed recently, I think it's terrific that Arizona has taken the bull by the horns as a border state. I would disagree, though, with having signed that legislation. I do think it's going to lead to racial profiling.
Brian?
Well, let me ask you this. If you stop and think about it, at least in my opinion, the federal government is limited in the options available to it to enforce mandates on the states. Seems to me that if the state governors or legislatures or the states in some fashion would organize, that if they, on any given issue, if they achieve a critical mass, and they just say, we're not playing ball on this one, we're not doing this, what really is the federal government going to do? The representatives we have in Washington are really cowards, and they are not going to send out, they are not going to come out and try to force things on the states. I mean, they just don't have the courage to do that.
No, I think you hit it on the head. You're never going to get that consensus, and if you do, then that's effective, and that will cause the federal government to back down.
Brian, thank you so much for the call. 977-1070 is the phone number, and of course we've seen it here in Virginia with the healthcare freedom legislation that was passed, basically saying that if you live in Virginia, you cannot be subject to a federal mandate to purchase health care, nor can you be subject to a federal fine. And our Attorney General, Ken Cuccinelli, has taken it to the streets up in Washington, D.C. to defend our rights.
And, Rob, you ended the last segment by saying, well, let's get back and let's find out what's the biggest issue facing the country today.
Yes,
well, the
indeed.
biggest issue facing the country today is the fact that we're bankrupt. We're borrowing 43 cents out of every dollar that we're spending, so we need to slash spending. Taxes, it's unacceptable that taxes would go up. When you look at reforms that really are needed, again, it's getting back to the Constitution of the United States. It's about free markets. I would argue that school choice, bringing competition to public education, is something very valuable. That when it comes to health care, getting the government out of the way when it comes to impediments to health care by truly opening health care up to competition, better product, better service, lower price. I would argue that the Constitution says that we need to provide a strong national defense, but I would argue that our security, that our defense is not being threatened in either Iraq or Afghanistan, that we should be out of those two countries. Out of the dollar that's being spent on worldwide defense, 50 cents of that dollar is being spent by the United States, and we're 5% of the world's population. I'm afraid at the end of the day we're going to end up, we're building roads, schools, bridges, highways, hospitals in Iraq and Afghanistan. Don't we have those same needs here today? And if I might just touch on the war on drugs, I think that marijuana should be legalized. I think that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition related, not use related. We're spending $70 billion a year. Half law enforcement, half the courts, half the prisons is drug-related. And to what end? We're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country. We did it with the prohibition of alcohol. It didn't work. I don't know why we can't make those same correlations when it comes to marijuana. Let's legalize it, and by legalize, tax it, regulate it, control it. It'll never be legal to smoke pot, become impaired, get behind the wheel of a car. It'll never be legal to smoke pot, do harm to others. It'll never be legal for kids to smoke pot. Similar to alcohol. I don't know why we can't make those same correlations with what happened during the prohibition, like I say, of alcohol, and apply that to marijuana today.
Let's go beyond marijuana, because certainly this is a discussion that gets very big, because we talk about other things like cocaine, PCP, or other sorts of drugs, LSD. Do you extrapolate the same problems in making those substances illegal as you do with marijuana, or would you draw the line at marijuana?
Well, I think that we should adopt harm reduction strategies regarding all these other drugs, and that's the things we really care about, which is reducing death, disease, crime, and corruption. Basically looking at the problem first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. Portugal and Holland have effectively decriminalized all drug use, and as a result of these actions, they have, in Holland's case, 60% drug use as that of the United States. That's kids, that's adults, that's marijuana, that's hard drugs. Of course, that's on a per capita basis. Portugal actually has recent evidence to show that drug use has declined in Portugal as a result of effectively having decriminalized drug use. So there are other options. Let's recognize that there are now 100 million plus Americans who have done illegal drugs, and given the wrong set of circumstances, really, are we going to have arrested all of them?
When we talk, Governor Gary Johnson, about reducing the size of federal government, and we have one candidate here in the 5th District who said he wants to slash the size of federal government by 50%, which I would applaud. Is that realistic? And if so, in what ways are we going to do that?
Well, it needs to be embarked on. I always say right now, federal government needs to be cut by 43% because we're borrowing 43 cents out of every dollar, and that doesn't get us to being able to pay back the current deficit. But let's keep in mind that that number is moving against us currently. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. So first you got to put the brakes on this. And, yeah, I think that it is realistic, and that if we don't do that, this country is no good to any country in the world bankrupt, and this country is no good to any of us as citizens as a bankrupt country. Again, keep in mind, federal government is printing money to cover these obligations, and as a result of that, we're going to see a much weaker dollar and inflation on the near horizon.
But how is it that we have these people in office right now, the present administration, past administrations, who believe that we could just keep doing this and there's not going to be any ramifications?
Rob, I don't think anybody really believed that we could continue to pay this stuff, that we could pay this out. We ourselves watch these Ponzi schemes being passed, and now I'm talking about public retirements, where in 20 years an individual starts work at 20, retires at the age of 40, and for many of those individuals they're going to live another 60 years. Look, this was never going to hold up, and we ourselves watch these promises being made that we just knew weren't right. But now the chickens are home to roost. We have to address these issues. It will never be easier to address these issues than tomorrow, but we've got to embark on this tomorrow, as opposed to kicking the can down the road, which we've done.
Absolutely. 977-1070 is the phone number. Governor Gary Johnson is our guest. We have a line open for you, and as soon as we're back from the break, we have Doug on the line, so stand by. The Schilling Show returns in a moment.